So just make sure that you drive safely once you leave tonight. It's very bad weather outside. Alhamdulillah, a lot of people are staying home and hopefully watching us from home. I'm on call tonight. Hopefully people decide to stay home since it's their Christmas Eve and they let me do this halaqah without interruptions. So where we are in the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ is just at the end of the 6th year of his hijrah. I have to be honest, I love this part of the seerah. Well, I say that about every part, but I honestly really do love this part. Like it's really beautiful. It's really interesting. A lot of people know aspects of the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ well, but they don't know this part well. And it's very important for them to do so. It's a really beautiful part. Meaning a lot of people know maybe the suffering in Mecca. They understand Badr and Uhud and Al-Khandaq, the Battle of the Trench. They know those parts. But they don't really understand like the end, like what happened kind of towards the end. It's just like any book. People read the first part really well, and then the last couple of chapters kind of fall off. Okay? Even you study any exam, you know the first couple of chapters, and the rest of it you don't know too well. It's just how we are. And I think it's important that this part of his story, alayhi salatu is well known and because it's really, really beautiful, and a lot comes together. Like the full 360 kind of comes. It all comes together when you know the last maybe couple of years of his life, alayhi salatu wasalam, and we are coming close to them. This is the end of the 6th year. So we have year 7, 8, 9, 10, and then a little bit of 11. So 4.5 years, something around that, less actually than 4.5 years, where we are right now, and he'll pass away, alayhi salatu wasalam. So really, there's not much time left for him, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. That's why it's really important to kind of know that end piece. Years 5 and 6, as I explained over the last maybe number of sessions, I call them the years of social reform after Khandaq. Because that's when a lot of the verses that talk about ethics and values and principles and haram and halal and how to behave, and it all happened based on examples. Meaning people made mistakes and the Quran came and pointed them out. And we went through a lot of examples. For instance, we talked about hadith al-ifk, the incidents of ifk, and when Aisha radiallahu anha was talked about. And we talked about the racism that happened during Ghazwat Bani al-Mustaliq. And I gave a couple of stories, and we talked about the story of the stolen shield, Qisat al-Dir' al-Masruqa, last time. And each and every incident the Quran would be revealed, would talk about one of those values, whether it's justice, whether it's equality, whether it's refusing gossip and refusing mistreatment, or whatever it is. The Quran came and talked about these issues. We don't do this very often, but I have a few stories just to kind of lighten things up, that there was evidence of improvement, that things did change. The Sahaba, I think the key difference between us and them is that they actually learned this stuff. Like they actually learned what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala taught them. Meaning they had the problem, the Quran addressed it, the Prophet ﷺ pointed it out, this is not good, and then they moved on. Like they actually said, okay, this is not right, we won't do this again. And then they didn't do it again. I think that's the key difference. I think that's the actual problem that we suffer from as Muslims. Because every year, if you, I don't know if you've noticed, but every single year, it's almost like clockwork. Every time there's a certain time of the year, a certain time where people like to disagree on something. It's like tradition. Muslims fight over, if it's the time of the Prophet ﷺ's birth, or if it's time of Zakat al-Fitr, it's tradition. We have to start fighting, and social media, mashallah, is a good place for us to kind of document history. So all you have to do is go at the same timing every year, you'll find the fights begin and people are back and forth. It's like we don't really learn from anything that occurs, and the same mistakes happen time and time again. That's why as Muslims we've always, I've been hearing mashayikh complaining about the same stuff since I was a kid. I grew up listening to them complain about certain problems, and now I'm middle-aged and I'm complaining about the same problems, and I fear that I'll be an old guy and I'll be complaining about the same problems, and that says that something's wrong. Because why is it that we're not able to actually address an issue appropriately and then actually grow from it, or stop doing it, or fix it, or repair it, or correct it, or whatever terminology you think is appropriate for this type of setting. But definitely the Sahaba were good at that. Definitely one of the key differences is that they learned from their mistakes and they didn't go back and make them again. And that was a big deal. And that's why I think they had the potential and the ability to grow that way and actually take those steps forward. And I feel like that's missing. Because we're very good at the talk and we're good at projecting the ideas at others, but we're not actually good at internalizing what we heard and then applying it to ourselves and then ensuring that we don't fall into the same problems in the future. That's a missing piece. So I gave the example of Thumama ibn Uthal radiallahu anhu, who was someone that they brought, and the Prophet ﷺ tied to the masjid, and he watched the Muslims just perform their daily prayers and accepted Islam afterwards. And I've always thought that was a really good example of how the behavior of Muslims actually at that time was impressive enough that this person decided to accept Islam just based on observing Muslims' behavior. How they performed their wudu, how they entered the masjid, how they greeted each other, how they treated each other, how they stood in line, all of that. He just watched that for a couple of days. And that was enough for him to say, okay, this is actually pretty cool. I like this. I would like to be a part of a community that's like that. And he did, radiallahu anhu. And he ended up getting into combat with Quraysh because he cut off the grain from them for a couple of months and they almost starved. And he was starting a war with Quraysh, and the Prophet ﷺ said, no, we're not going to starve them. That's not. Ali ﷺ was not interested in squeezing Quraysh to death. And if this is unclear to you, then today's lesson and next time will make this very clear to you. You will totally see that Ali ﷺ was not interested in trying to squeeze his enemy to the point where they couldn't breathe. No, he's trying to guide them. It's a very difficult thing to guide someone who dislikes you or hates you or is actually willing to fight you. It's not an easy. That takes a lot. That takes a lot of empathy, compassion. It takes a lot of integrity. You have to be someone who's very classy to be able to say, you know what, you want to kill me, but I still think that there's good in you. Enough to try and give it my best shot to see if I can guide you. And instead of shedding blood, you end up joining the cause. And had he not done that, alayhi salatu wasalam, a lot would have changed. I think Islam wouldn't have reached as far. Because a lot of the names that he could have wiped out, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, during a certain period, ended up carrying the beacon of Islam everywhere. Like the same names that could have been wiped out at a certain period, as I will show you. Without them, the Islamic history would have been different. There would have been something missing. There would have been parts of the world that didn't get Islam as early. Meaning that some of us, you know how it is when I don't know if there's any time travel or geeks in the room who like this type of stuff. You go back in the past and you change something, then you can alter the present and people can start disappearing, right? Because whatever led to their birth wouldn't have led to their birth. Right? I don't know if you know. So I think that if the Prophet ﷺ had gone a bit heavier and wiped out some of those people, a couple of people in this room would just have disappeared, wouldn't be here. Because we accepted this, like our ancestors accepted Islam because some of those people actually were around and committed late. Yes, late, it was late, but they still did, and their impact actually made it to the countries that we come from, and that's why we're Muslim today. So the Prophet ﷺ could have sought vengeance, rightfully so, at any point in time. Rightfully so, he could have done it, but he didn't. He said, you know what, I'll stick it out a little bit longer. I'll put up with the obnoxiousness of the other group and the arrogance of the other group and the animosity and the hatred. Hopefully that will lead to something good in the future, and it totally did. It totally did. It was just something for us to kind of reflect upon as Muslims that, you know what? Sometimes you have to swallow that, large ego. I know it probably hurt your throat when you do it, but if you swallow your ego, a lot of khair comes from that. If you just swallow it and do what is going to be beneficial for the larger group, there's a lot of khair in doing that. A lot of khair. Actually, nothing but khair comes from swallowing your ego every once in a while. Honestly, if you learn to swallow your ego permanently and just put it aside, that's how you actually make sure that khair continues to come from you forever. But it's just something worthy of contemplation. So there's two stories I want to add to that are the story of the Seerah of Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah to the coast side. They call it Seerah al-Khabat. Al-Khabat is a type of tree that they got. So the reason I'm telling you the story is that during this Sariyah, the Prophet ﷺ sent Abu Ubaidah because there was a group gathering, preparing to raid Medina. So he had his spies ﷺ all over. So whenever something like that came across, after Khandaq, he would send immediately a group to neutralize it really quickly. And almost in none of these instances was there actually a fight. Because the moment the Prophet ﷺ sent 40 or 50 men, the group that was gathering just dismembered quickly. And the funny thing in these stories is that the number of the people the Prophet ﷺ sent compared to the number of people who had assembled is ridiculous. Like it's so off that sometimes I took a long time studying these things because I would question these numbers. 2,500 people assembled, he sends 50 guys. These 50 people are on their way, there's 2,500, they run away. Kif? It's impossible. They outnumber them they ridiculously outnumber them. It's like 1 to 500, 1 to 50, 1 to 500 something. Why would you run away? It's just, there was this fear that the people of Arabia had from the Muslims. This fear. And the more you study it, the fear comes from the fact that the Muslims truly believed in what they stood for. So they weren't afraid of dying for it. The other group was just in it for the money. They were in it for the reputation. They were in it for whatever political gain they could get out of it. When you're in it and you have a lot to lose and you're fighting someone who has nothing to lose, you're at a disadvantage just by entering. Like if you enter the ring with those two mentalities, there's a lot. For example, a world champion fighting a newbie is not the same, right? Not at all, because the newbie has nothing to lose. He has nothing to lose. If he loses, it doesn't matter. He just starts out, he has no reputation. This guy is a world champion. If he loses, this is going to hurt his ego, hurt his reputation. Oh my gosh, everyone's going to be talking about it. So there's a disadvantage here. The other two teams, a very known team and a weak team. The weak team has nothing to lose. They go all in. They play ferociously because they have nothing to lose. The other team has a reputation to maintain. There's an imbalance here. It's a problem. Now, the example is not the same, but the Muslims in general, because they didn't fear death for the sake of Allah. If it was coming, then it's coming. They didn't fear it. The other group totally did. They didn't believe in anything, and they weren't really willing to die for any cause at all. So that imbalance was so real that 2,500 would run away from 50 men on horseback. So Abu Ubaidah was sent towards a group, and they dismembered all right away. But he was told by the Prophet ﷺ to stay in that area and hold on and see if he can catch some of the leaders. And there was a caravan from Quraysh that he wanted them to intercept on the way. So he asked them to stay in that area for a couple of months. That was the plan. Abu Ubaidah's plan in terms of how much food they were going to have was, he underestimated how much he needed, and so did the group with him. So they got really hungry. They got so hungry that they would eat the leaves of a tree called Al-Khabat, and they would eat the tree, and that's why it was called the Seerah, and their lips turned green. And the reason I'm telling you this story is that they were so hungry that Abu Ubaidah said, bring all of your food together, and it was basically a pile of dates. And he would give them each a date for a day or two. And they would just eat, kind of suck on that date for like 48 hours or something. And they didn't fight over the food, and nothing bad happened. And they were asked later on, what is a tamra going to do for you over the course of a day or a few days? فقالوا والله لقد وجدنا فقدها حين فنيت. We actually felt how much it meant after we didn't have it anymore. Like the one tamra that I was sucking on for a couple of days, once it actually was gone, there was nothing left of it, I missed it, because even though it was offering me almost nothing, but we said that's how hungry they became. Radiallahu anhum. The story, this is maybe not specifically related to the theme that I'm trying to explain to you, but they proved that they were able to grow. They proved they were able to share, that they wouldn't fight over things, that they were actually able to kind of follow the rules appropriately. There was an obvious and clear improvement in behavior. And amongst the story that happened is that they got so hungry that they started going looking for food, so they went close to the coast. Arabs aren't really big with water. They're not friends with the sea. They don't sail much. So they don't know. They go by the coast and they see washed up on the shore what we think, they call it ambar. And what that usually is, wallahu alam, is a type of like a small whale or maybe. But they talk about it, and it's really interesting in the books of Seerah when they talk about it, because they had never seen anything like it. They'd never seen a whale before. And they would talk about it so big that, basically a couple of guys could sit in its eyeball socket and sit down and talk. And you could have like a camel walk under its rib cage or something like that. And maybe that's true, I don't know, but I think it was a little bit of an exaggeration. But the point was that they had seen this creature coming from the sea that they'd never seen before. And obviously, if you're not a sea person, then seeing a whale is very interesting. And they ate from the meat of this whale. يقول أبو عبيدة فأكلنا حتى سمنا. We ate and actually gained weight, become fat because we ate so much of it. And on our way back when the mission was complete, we took some of the meat with us. Like it was so much of it. So we told the Prophet, we told Rasulullah, this is what we found. Prior to that, Qais ibn Sa'd ibn Ubadah had slaughtered a few camels for the whole army, like some of his own camels, which is obviously very expensive, and you're not required to do that no matter how hungry people are, to slaughter your own camel. That's like your car. Like, this is all you got. So he did it anyways, and once he was going to slaughter the fourth, Abu Ubaidah told him, don't do it. No, that's enough. Jazakallah khair, don't do more. So Abu Ubaidah told the Prophet, Ya Rasulullah, Qais actually slaughtered 3 camels. فَقَالَ مِنْ أَهْلِ الْجُودِ وَالْكَرَمِ. This is a person who has true generosity. And then he told them, Ya Rasulullah, we found this huge whale, and we ate from it. فَقَالَ رِزْقٌ سَاقَهُ اللَّهُ إِلَيْكُمْ. This is a beautiful rizq that Allah gave you, that you're eating from. هَلْ عِنْدَكُمْ مِنْ لَحْمِهِ شَيْءٍ. Do you have anything of the meat left? فَقَالُوا نَعَمْ. فَقَالَ إِيتُونِي بِهِ. Bring me the meat. فَأَكَلَ مِنْهُ صلى الله عليه وسلم. So he ate seafood, عليه الصلاة والسلام, from the whale, or whatever creature had washed up shore over at the Red Sea. I don't know exactly what it was. The second story was the story of Abdul Rahman ibn Auf, his troop to Dumat al-Jandal, which is somewhere up in the northern part of Arabia, and it's a known part of the Arabic world if you've traveled around. Dumat al-Jandal is known. So he was sent over there because the Romans were preparing a small army to raid Medina. You can imagine his reputation, alayhi salam, the reputation of the Muslims was becoming real. He had actually built a country with a constitution and a leader and an army, and he's won battles, and he stood up against the main powers of the land, and the main powers of the land have failed to bring him down. So this became something known. So the empires around are like, you know how the emperors, you guys watch the TV. The emperors are like, this small, send an army and wipe them out, and I don't have time for this. So they would have a small army prepare, so the Prophet ﷺ would immediately send a group to neutralize them. So he sent Abdul Rahman ibn Auf. And the story is actually quite beautiful, because he would bring Abdul Rahman. Again, this is not maybe specific to the theme that I'm trying to explain to you, but I thought I'd share the story with you. He would bring Abdul Rahman bin Auf to the masjid, and he would sit him, and he would put the imamah on the head of Abdul Rahman bin Auf, starting a sunnah that exists still today. So the Prophet ﷺ did something called ta'meem. ay ammama Abdul Rahman ibn Auf. Like he put his, so he tied the imamah. So the imamah is basically just a hat that's a little bit more stiff, and then you tie a cloth around it. And that's how Arabs would dress. And it would help keep the head safe from the sun and from the cold, by the way. So it would work for both. And most scholars wear it today because the Prophet ﷺ always had an imamah on. And it was considered a problem for a man to be walking around without one. Like if you walked around without one, you were either a slave or a kid. A full-grown man who has a job and reputation should be walking around without something on their head. That's how things were back then. Obviously, that's not how the world works today. It's fine, but I'm saying that's how the social norm was then. Actually, if you walked around without an imamah, your testimony in court wouldn't be accepted. Like if you walked around and it was known that you were walking around without an imamah on your head, then you can't testify, because that says something about maybe how you. Again, that's the norm of the time. I don't know what similarities we could draw to today, but I'm just telling you that that's how it was. So wearing an imamah was quite common, and the Prophet ﷺ brought Abdul Rahman ibn Auf, and he made dua for him, and he actually tied his imamah with his own hands, put it on his head, and arkhaha bayna katifayhi, and the ama'im that the Prophet ﷺ would wear, there would be a little piece of cloth that would fall under and just sit between the shoulders. And it was a black one. And he put it on Sayyidina Abdul Rahman ibn Auf's head. And since then, scholars have always, if you ever wear an imamah, it should be something that someone put on your head. Someone should, this is based on it's a chain. When I was younger, I remember this happening where one of the students wore an imamah, and he got like completely chastised. Because he asked, who put that on your head? I said, no one. I went and bought it from Suq al-Hari'ah. And I just went and bought imamah. And they chewed him out. You're not allowed to wear it on your own. This has to be something that is put on your head by your scholar, who had it put on his head by his scholar, who had put it by his scholar. And when that happened, I asked my sheikh, and he actually gave me his sanad. I mean, he told me who put his imamah on his head, who put the imamah on the head of him. Going back, basically, it was counted back to the Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq from, this goes back to Sayyidina Ali ibn Abi Talib anhu, to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who did this, who would do ta'meem, who would put ama'im on people, and this was a sign of dignity or respect. So this actually exists till this day, and it's something that I think there's some authenticity, connected to it, and there's some value in it. So he put the imamah on Abdul Rahman ibn Auf's head, and he sent him. And this is what he said, and I want to share with you maybe these words. فقال اغزوا بسم الله وفي سبيل الله فقاتل من كفر بالله لا تغل ولا تغدر ولا تقتل وليدا فهذا عهد الله وسيرة نبيه فيكم. So to them, go in the sake of Allah, and go and fight them for the sake of Allah. Fight those who refuse to believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Do not steal. Do not take the bounty unlawfully. Do not betray your enemy. Do not slaughter a child. Do not, فَهَذَا عَهْدُ اللَّهِ فِيكُمْ. This is the covenant of Allah that He has amongst you. When you go for war, that you adhere to these ethics and you adhere to these principles when you do so. That is the covenant of Allah, and that is the way of your Prophet amongst you. So Abdurrahman bin Auf would go, and as Abdurrahman was on his way to Dumat al-Jandal, he would tell his army these things. He would say this, which is what the Prophet ﷺ told him in the masjid when he put the imamah on his head. So this is what he said. فَقَالَ أَيُّهَا النَّاسِ, O people, he gave them a small sermon. اتقوا خمسا قبل أن تحل بكم أو يحل بكم. Beware of 5 things before they actually occur to you. ما نقص مكيال قوم إلا أخذهم الله بالسنين ونقص من الثمرات لعلهم يرجعون. If we cheat when it comes to finances in terms of buying and selling, if we cheat one another, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bring upon us difficult years and He will make us very poor until we have taqwa and go back and start dealing justly and fairly again. وَمَا نَكَثَ قَوْمٌ عَهْدَهُمْ إِلَّا سَلَّطَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِمْ عَدُوَّهُمْ. And no group on earth will betray their covenants or will lie about what they're entrusted with or what they promised to do, except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make their enemy stronger than them, and they will suffer from the strength of their enemy. وَمَا مَنَعَ قَوْمٌ الزَّكَاةَ إِلَّا أَمْسَكَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِمْ قَطْرَ السَّمَاءِ. And no group of people will withhold zakat except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will withhold the khayr of this world from them. He's talking about the rain. What he means by the earth will hold back its khayr if you hold back your zakah. وَلَوْلَا الْبَهَائِمْ لَمْ يُسْقَوْا. And if it wasn't for the fact that there are animals that didn't do anything wrong, they would see no water at all. وَمَا ظَهَرَتِ الْفَاحِشَةُ فِي قَوْمٍ إِلَّا سَلَّطَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِمُ الطَّاعُونَ. And people will not indulge in fawahish except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will send amongst them diseases that didn't exist in the people before them. وَمَا حَكَمَ قَوْمٌ بِغَيْرِ آيِ الْقُرْآنِ إِلَّا أَلْبَسَهُمُ اللَّهُ شِيَعًا وَأَذَاقَ بَعْضَهُم بَأْسَ بَعْضٍ. And the Muslims who do not judge themselves with the Qur'an, if they don't do that, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will cause them to be divided and they will fight amongst each other. And this is what Abdurrahman ibn Auf told his group before they went. They went to Dumat al-Jandal. Again, the army there, this time he went with around 2,000 people. It was a bigger group because the army was much bigger. It dismembered before Abdurrahman ibn Auf even got there, and he was able to come back, radiallahu anhu wa ardah. So, before I even start this last piece of the seerah, this is an important kind of disclaimer. This is real. What happened from the end of year 6, or even before that, from the beginning of year 6, you could basically say, to year 10, was that the Prophet ﷺ and the Muslims were severely betrayed. They were betrayed on a small level, meaning 1 or 2 people being killed or murdered, more times than we actually are able to quantify. Betrayed on a larger level, meaning groups of people in the 10s and the 20s and the 30s being slaughtered by tribes that have covenants with the Prophet ﷺ over 26 times. This happened over the course of a number of years. Meaning the Prophet ﷺ would have an agreement with a neighboring tribe or a neighboring group of people, neighboring small town or city beside Medina. The agreement would be that we don't harm you, don't harm us, and there's a mutual respect, there's a treaty of peace. And then that tribe would want to win a little bit of win face or with Quraysh, so they would find a few Muslims going on a caravan or going on a mission or going somewhere. They would capture them and slaughter them, or capture them and give them to Quraysh, and Quraysh would do it. It happened so many times. This recurrent treason became a problem because a lot of the verses that we're going to talk about after Hudaybiyah, for example, are going to be very clear. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to point out that the Prophet ﷺ has to engage in combat with them. And he has to remove them. And this is not because the Muslims became a bit stronger, so they wanted to basically steamroll everyone around them. The reason was that every time the Prophet ﷺ had a covenant with them, they would betray it. Have another covenant, and they would betray it. And it happened so many times that it became futile to re-sign a treaty with them. It's not going to work because there's no, why would we do it again? You betrayed us like 3 times so far. Why is this time going to be better? What guarantees why would I believe you now? Why should I trust you this time? If every single time we do it, you say, and the example that I'm going to give, there are a few examples. So Uyayna bin Hisn, for example, Uyayna bin Hisn was one of the leaders of Khuza'a, and the Prophet ﷺ, or Ghatafan, sorry, one of the leaders of Ghatafan, and there was a treaty with the Prophet ﷺ after Khandaq that we don't fight you, you don't fight us, we keep it neutral. And the answer was yes. And Uyayna, the moment the Prophet ﷺ went on a mission, he was no longer in Medina, he immediately raided a kind of a peripheral part of Medina. So not the center of it, but just outside, the outskirts. And he killed the son of Abu Dharr al-Ghifari. So what's the name of the son of Abu Dharr al-Ghifari? Dharr al-Ghifari. So he killed Dharr al-Ghifari, and he captured his pregnant wife. And he stole all of the camels that Dharr was a shepherd of, right? So the Prophet, and it was horrible because Dharr was doing nothing. He was a shepherd. He had imagine this gentleman sitting with his wife, pregnant wife, and they're shepherds of some camels and sheep, and they raid them, they slaughter the man, and they kidnap the woman, which is a group of people that the Prophet ﷺ is supposed to feel safe around. The Muslims should be safe around because there's a treaty. But Uyayna didn't care because he wanted the wealth and he wanted to prove to Quraysh that he's still kind of technically on their side. So the Prophet ﷺ had to leave the mission he was going towards and actually go after Uyayna bin Hisn. And he was able to go after Uyayna, and he was able to retrieve the camels, and the lady was actually, she saved herself. In a long story where she was actually able to steal a camel and find her way back to the Muslims, and she gave birth when she arrived in Medina. But this is an example of something that occurred. Something called Ukal and Urayna, which are two tribes. This is a known story that exists in the Seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, of two tribes that also committed a horrific betrayal of the Muslims. They came and they asked the Prophet ﷺ, they said, we accept Islam, but we are people we are Bedouins, we're people of the desert, we don't like living in cities, too much disease, it's not nice, it's a bad environment, I'm not happy. Can you send some people to teach us? So he said, of course we will send, because they came and they gave their shahada. And the Prophet ﷺ sent with them maybe a couple of dozen people. Once they're outside of Medina, they slaughter all of them, and they steal their camels. So the Prophet ﷺ had to send another group of people after them to capture them and bring them back. It was ridiculous. Every time there was some degree of trust, or the Prophet ﷺ, the Muslims would show good faith, would offer services, and then the people that they're dealing with would go ahead and they would betray and kill people. So blood was being spilled. Innocent people were being murdered. So a lot of and with all of that, the Prophet ﷺ's sole goal of all of it was to achieve peace, as I'm going to, inshallah, prove to you, or you're going to see in the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. Banu Lahyan, for example, another group of people that had picked up a caravan from the Muslims. The caravan had maybe 35 Muslims, men, women, and children, and they slaughtered all of them and stole everything from them. And this caravan was going by their tribe, which was an agreement that we go by the tribe, no problem. They decided to do that and then run. The tribe moved. The tribe killed them, stole the goods, and moved. So the Prophet ﷺ had to send actually like a small army of Seerah after Banu Lahyan to catch them and bring back the stuff and bring back the people who performed it. And this was a difficult time. This kept on happening. Why? Because Quraysh still was saying anyone who can kill Muhammad or kill people with them is good for, their idol gets a higher spot on the Kaaba, or they get special treatment when they come for Hajj, something like that. Quraysh was still saying this stuff. Anyone who can harm the Muslims is going to be a better ally to us. We will favor them over others. And because they were saying that, a lot of these tribes that have only known Quraysh, old habits die hard, and propaganda is a very strong tool, but people trust. Takes a long. If people collectively trust in something, it takes a very long time for them to lose trust in it, and vice versa. If people don't trust in something, it takes a long time for them to learn to trust it. People's trust is a very strong tool in the world today. It's an extremely strong tool. It works more than maybe you and I even fully comprehend. Like, it works way more than we actually understand. Like, literally, the way that the economy works in this world is based purely on people's trust of a piece of paper with a face on it and a number on its upper right or upper left corner. There's nothing else behind it. It's just a piece of paper. There's nothing, it doesn't mean anything. It's just people's trust. We trust this piece of paper here. And it takes a long time for people to lose trust in that. Just like it's very difficult to get people to trust something new or something different. It's just hard. The collective trust of the human race or large groups of people is something difficult to earn and something difficult to lose. Quraysh, over a couple of centuries, had won the trust of the Arabs. That they are the guardians of the Kaaba. They are the servers of God. So the Arab tribes trusted Quraysh. Yes, Muhammad is bringing an alternative that makes way more sense. The social contract is way better. But it's Quraysh. It's Quraysh. Quraysh. What, Quraysh is going to... Suddenly Quraysh is no longer going to work anymore? It's not going to function. They can't believe it. So even though the Prophet ﷺ extending an olive branch and explaining and citing trees, they just can't help it. They just go back to what they're used to. No, if I have an opportunity to win the favor of Quraysh, then fine. And it just kept on happening. So the Prophet ﷺ, what he needed, so now you can say, what is he? So you can see why he did what he did for Hudaybiyah. What he needed was he had to be able to change the narrative coming from Quraysh in order for this to work. All right. So the Prophet ﷺ was thinking. He had the army force that was strong enough to charge southwards towards Mecca and just completely take it over. He could raid Mecca, take out Quraysh, take them out, and run and actually become Quraysh. He had the ability, he had the capacity, he had the numbers, he had the military power to do that. After Khandaq, he stood and said, "Naghzuhum wa la yaghzunana." Now we go to them, they don't come to us. That's it, they can never come to us again. They burnt all their cars, they have no more fuel. So he had the capacity, it was there. But he didn't want more bloodshed. He didn't want this to be a coup. He didn't want this to happen through war. He wanted this to happen through a different system. He wanted to force Quraysh's hand to peace. You're going to see this all throughout the next maybe couple of 2 or 3 months of what's left of the Seerah. That he's going to be given time and time again. The reason, he's going to be provoked, and he's going to have the opportunity to just go down and just wipe Quraysh out, take control of the Kaaba, get rid of the Asnam, but he doesn't. He doesn't. And he prolongs the story for an extra 2.5 years. Meaning, he could have done this in year 8 or 9. And then 10 and 11 wouldn't have to be what it was, because it would have been ended then, but he didn't, alayhi salatu wasalam. He gave it a lot of time. He kept on. Why? Because like I said, he doesn't want to shed blood. Because, again, had he done that, people here would have disappeared. Groups of here wouldn't be here if he did that. But he didn't do it, alayhi salatu wasalam. He chose peace. He chose to force Quraysh's hand for peace. So he's thinking, how do I do this? How do I force Quraysh's hand? So he's really thinking, he's asking people to think. Then he sees a dream. It's not wahi, it's just a dream. If you really think about something long enough and hard enough, you'll see it in your dream. Like you'll see aspects of it. Psychologically, it's a part of your experience. So this dream wasn't a dream of wahi, as far as we can tell, because it was just a dream. And the dream, he saw that they were doing Umrah. Right? It's in لقد صدق الله رسوله الرؤيا بالحق لتدخلن المسجد الحرام إن شاء الله آمنين محلقين رؤوسكم ومقصرين لا تخافون فعلم ما لم تعلموا فجعل من دون ذلك فتحا قريبا. We'll talk about that inshallah very soon, this verse. So he saw a dream. His dream, he was performing Umrah with the Sahaba. He woke up, big smile. Comes for Fajr, prays Fajr, turns around, big smile. Sahaba, what is it, Ya Rasulullah? He said, I saw ru'ya, I saw a dream. What is it? We're going to perform Umrah. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Especially the Muhajirin. How long has it been since they've been to Mecca? Yeah, this is the end of 6th year, right? 6th year. So most of them 6 years. Psychologically, they say that's exactly when you're the most homesick. Once it's 10 years, you start forgetting a little bit of the details. But the first 5-6 years is when you really, really become homesick for the place that you left. Then after that, if you just make it to a decade, wherever you are becomes your new home, and that becomes a distant memory that brings some nostalgia, but you survive. So they were at that peak of wanting to go back to Mecca, and obviously Mecca is beautiful, and it has the Kaaba, and these people, it's not like they just moved to Mecca at some point in their life. No, they were born in Mecca, their fathers were born in Mecca, their grandfathers, great-grandfathers, they can go back to their lineage, 8, 9 grandfathers, easy, all coming from Mecca. So this was a big deal. They wanted, and performing Umrah and going to the Kaaba, this is beautiful. They were ecstatic, they were very, very happy. So the Prophet ﷺ was going to use this for his advantage. So here's the thing. Here's the beauty of this plan. It's an insanely smart plan. The Prophet ﷺ came up with that if he performs Umrah and he manages somehow to get the Muslims in their ihram right in front of Mecca, right at the outskirts of Mecca, he forces Quraysh to do one of 3 things. Either Quraysh can let them perform Umrah, and if he performs Umrah with the Muslims, then the view of the Arabs all around is that things have worked out. He worked it out. The Muslims and Quraysh worked it out, no problem anymore. So people won't want to murder Muslims anymore for the favor of Quraysh because Umrah actually occurred. And Quraysh obviously knows that, so they didn't want it. Or they would send them back, which is great if they send them back. If they don't allow them to perform Umrah, it's great. Why? Because that burns any credibility that Quraysh has in the eyes of the Arabs. The only credibility Quraysh has is the guardians of the Kaaba. They are the gatekeepers of Mecca. And the law of the land before Islam is that no one can be sent back if they're coming for pilgrimage. No one. Regardless of what faith you are, what color skin, where you doesn't matter. You're coming for pilgrimage, ahlan wa sahlan, you're allowed in. No one is allowed to be sent back for pilgrimage. So if they send the Muslims back for pilgrimage, they're here to do Umrah, oh, excellent. Excellent, you just burnt we're happy to go home. You're burned. You're burnt. No one's ever going to listen to you again. And they knew that. And the third option would be a treaty, some form of, and the fourth option, which I don't have up there, is that they actually fight them. And that's the scary piece. What if they decide to play this in a way where they make it seem as if we're here for war, even though we're not? Right? So that piece, he has to work around that because that's not a good option. Right? The other 3, so win or win. Whatever happens, you let me in, I win. You send me back, I win. A treaty, I win. Whatever happens, I win. If we end up in combat, I lose. I don't want in combat because it's just not. It's going to seem as if I raided the Kaaba. I don't want to do that. That's not what I'm here for. So he had to maneuver ﷺ in a way where that wouldn't happen. That's all he had to do is figure out how is he going to maneuver so that he doesn't end up in war or in combat with them. ﷺ. A genius plan. If he can just get there. And he can, because Quraysh can't fight if this is the caveat. So Quraysh can't technically speaking, fight the Muslims if they're in their ihram right in front of Mecca. Right? Because all the tribes can see, so they can't fight. But anywhere else it could happen. If there's any evidence of provocation, if someone's provoking, if there's any evidence of hostility from the Muslims, all these things, they can use some propaganda and they can ruin stuff. So the Prophet ﷺ just had that one obstacle to overcome. So the Prophet ﷺ puts together, let me explain to you what he does. He puts together around 1,500 people, a bit less than that, maybe 1,400. Amongst them are non-Muslims. Like he brought with him the mushrikeen of the Arab that lived in Medina and the mushrikeen from around. So he went in a very diverse group. It was Muslims and non-Muslims. وَسَاقَ مَعَهُمُ الْهَدِي. And he brought with him all the sheep and the camels that were prepared for sacrifice, because if you perform Umrah, it's sunnah for certain reasons to perform Udhiyah or Hadi. The same thing goes for Hajj. So سَاقَ مَعَهُ الْهَدِي. And they left in Ihram, so they wore their Ihram. And they left their weapons behind, but in a way that was pretty sneaky or pretty intelligent, where he had all the weapons carried by another group that would come maybe 2 days later. Right? So he's going to move forward with the 1,400 people. They have their sheep, their camels, they're wearing ihram, labbaik Allahumma labbaik. And their actual weapons, in case this turns ugly, there's a group of maybe 200 people who are going to actually carry the weapons behind. And they're going to be maybe a day or a day and a half or 2 days behind. So they're not a part of this caravan. And he goes towards Mecca. Mecca, Quraysh finds out, they flip out. Now who are the leaders of Quraysh at this point? Abu Sufyan is no longer respected, by the way. He's there. He lost, after Khandaq, he lost his credibility. He was still respected, but he wasn't able to command anymore. If he started to speak, everyone, it's good. Shh, don't say anything. You literally took us 10,000 people over there, and we weren't able to even complete the siege, and everything worked out. So he lost face. So who took his spot were a bunch of younger people. His son Ikrimah ibn Abi Jahl, right, and Safwan ibn Umayyah, for example, and Suhail ibn Amr. Younger people were actually the leaders of Mecca, of Quraysh at that time. So the Prophet ﷺ was kind of bargaining that these younger guys will be two things: a little bit more open-minded and probably a little bit less experienced. So he can probably outsmart them in how to kind of maneuver to get this done. So he marches down towards Mecca with the ihram, but they are literally running. They're going really quickly. Quraysh hears, they freak out. They're like, no, we can't have him arrive here. Because immediately, Abu Sufyan, who no one's listening to, but Abu Sufyan is saying, look, if he ends up arriving outside, we're done. You cannot afford to let him. Yeah, Habibi, okay, fine, I'll be quiet, but listen to me. If they end up arriving outside of Mecca in their ihram, we're done. There's nothing we can do. We can't fix this anymore. You need to intercept them. So they say, fine. They send Khalid ibn al-Walid. They weren't really big on the idea. Had they been more, I think, convinced, the story would have been a bit different. They probably would have been able to actually intercept the Muslims. But because they didn't really listen to Abu Sufyan properly, they sent Khalid a little bit late, and they sent him a small group. So Khalid is going to intercept the Prophet somewhere in the middle of the desert, and then fight, and then make it look like there was a war. Right? And that's the end of it. And then there's no propaganda that can be used, and none of the options I showed you will apply, because it's somewhere in the middle of the desert. The Prophet ﷺ knew this was the case. He knew that at some point Khalid was going to come towards him, and he had his scouts up front. Once Khalid ibn Walid and his group moved, he stopped alayhi salatu wasalam, and he says, okay, who knows, who can show us an alternative way? I'm not sure, I don't think I have a map up here, but I used to have one. I don't think I have one anymore. Do I have one? No, I don't, sorry. So I usually have a map I can show. So because there's different ways to make it from Mecca. Till this day, there's only one highway. You can go from Mecca to Medina. It's very difficult, it's all mountains. But back then, the same thing. It was one way to do it. But there's an alternative way through the mountains that's very much more difficult and much harder to do, but you can do it. You can technically do it. So once Khalid was coming close, he's like, who knows an alternative way? A man from Aslam. Aslam was a tribe that wasn't even Muslim. Their name's Aslam, but they're not Muslim yet. And they were just allies of the Prophet ﷺ. They were coming with him for Umrah. So I know a different way. So he takes them through a different way, and they cover their tracks. On the way, by the way, just as a sidetrack story of this, of what happened, they're going up mountains and stuff. So it's Tariq Wa'ir. The landscape is very difficult. It's hard to walk. It's much more narrower. And as they're going, they end up finding, this actual story you'll find in the books of Seerah, where they'll come across a female dog that had just given birth, and she had puppies around her. And one of the Muslims came to kick her out of the way so that they can continue. The Prophet ﷺ, he said no, and they literally changed their route and went around to leave the female dog alone. This is an actual story that exists in the Seerah ibn Hisham and Seerah ibn Ishaq and Seerah al-Waqidi. Like if you go back to these old books that were written maybe 1,200 years ago, you'll find these stories in there, where the Muslims, the Prophet ﷺ, actually changed the route that was already difficult for a complete army, like 1,400 people, not to disturb a female dog that gave birth. We don't hate animals. We don't hate them. We don't hate dogs. We don't hate pigs. We don't hate them. We don't eat them. We don't bring them to slaughter on us in our houses, and we don't make them pets. That's all we do. Otherwise, they are neighbors on this planet, and they have every right to be here just as much as we do. And this is an important aspect, I think, to kind of remember and keep in mind. There's just ahkam regarding their cleanliness and ahkam that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has in His book that in the Sunnah of the Prophet that we should be respectful towards and should adhere to. So they would go around, they would go through these mountains. Khalid ibn Walid is marching on the normal path, and he's on his way. He's like, we should have run into them by now. So he keeps on going. He's like, we definitely should have run into them by now. So he sends some scouts on the way. Someone figure out what's going on, and one of the scouts comes back and said, yeah, they went on a different, no. So they turn around and they gallop behind, trying to catch up with the Prophet ﷺ. Unfortunately, the Prophet ﷺ, by the time Khalid make it, had already set and camped right at the end of Hudaybiyah. Hudaybiyah is an area. I don't know where the map went, honestly. I have a map. I'll bring it next time. I'll show you. The Hudaybiyah is a small area just outside the borders of Al-Haram. Now listen very carefully to this because you have to understand what I'm saying, these words that I'm using. If you are to Google Mecca today on the map, Mecca is huge. It's a very big city. I lived in it for a number of years. I lived in Mecca, but I lived in Hill. I lived in something called the Hill. Al-Hill means it's not within the boundaries of Al-Haram. Al-Haram is old Mecca or Bakka. And this is a very specific area. And that's the place where it's haram for there to be combat, it's haram to shed blood, it's haram to go hunting for game. It's haram, a number of things are haram to happen in that small area. Arafah, for example, you know Arafah? Arafah is in the Hill. Arafah is not in the Haram. Like Arafah itself is not inside the Haram. And there's a lot of areas just outside of Mecca that are very well known that are not inside the Haram. And Al-Hudaybiyah is one of those adjacent areas to the Haram. Meaning where Hudaybiyah ends, the Haram begins. Does that make sense? Like the actual boundaries of the Haram begin where Hudaybiyah ends. So the Prophet ﷺ came to Hudaybiyah and he set up camp right at the end of Hudaybiyah, right before the Haram. So literally, all he had to do is maybe walk a couple of steps and then he'll be inside the Haram, which is where Quraysh actually had guards. Like, you're not coming in. You come in, we fight. Fine, no problem. We'll set camp right outside of the Haram in the Hill. Khalid comes, he has his swords out, he finds 1,400 people in their ihram with their hadir right outside the Haram. Can't touch them anymore. Right? They're immune. You can't touch them anymore. If you do that, all of Arabia is watching. And the Prophet ﷺ had located a little bit farther away the group of guys who had the swords and who had the armor. Just keep it there. If needed, we'll access it. But for now, we're here to perform Umrah. Once he gets there, this is what they tell him. I don't know. Do I point out what the discussion he has with Budayl ibn Warqa? Yeah, he does. So when he first gets there, the Quraysh, obviously, Abu Sufyan told him, "You're done. Like, you can't. This is going to be very. How are you going to fix this? You can't fix this anymore." So they send out a man by the name of Budayl ibn Warqa al-Khuza'i. Khuza'a was one of the allies of the Prophet ﷺ, like one of the tribes that had alliances with the Muslims. And he was a very known leader. He was a very respected character. So he came to the Prophet ﷺ. It was like a showing of good faith from Quraysh, telling him this. Look, listen, Ya Muhammad, أقسموا ألا تدخلها عليهم حتى يموت آخر رجل منهم. They have all sworn. وقد خرجوا بالعود المطافيل وعليهم جلود النمور. And they've come out and they're at the outskirts of Mecca. They brought their children and their possessions with them. This was a symbol to say that they're not going to run. Because when you have your wife and your daughter behind you, you're not going to run because you have to protect them. So you stay till then, you fight till the end. It was like a symbol that they'll stay to the end. And they're wearing the skins of tigers, again, symbolism of that and they're willing to fight till the last person of them dies, and you don't enter Mecca. You're not going to come in. You're not coming in. So Budayl just came to say these words to the Prophet ﷺ, that you're not coming in. They've all sworn that you're not coming in, even if the last person of them wants to die. So the Prophet ﷺ would say the following. And this is definitely worth translating into a quote for you to learn. And this explains, this is in Bukhari, by the way. This quote exists in not only the books of Seerah, it's in the Sahih al-Bukhari. This is what he says, alayhi salatu wa sallam. قال يا ويح قريش, meaning, and this is just a term in Arabic that means, shame on them, or what's wrong with them. What's wrong with Quraysh? لقد أكلتهم الحرب. They have been it's like أكلتهم when you eat something. They've been eaten by war. This is a figure of speech in Arabic that means that they've been blinded by something. They've been consumed by it, right? In English it works as well. So they've been consumed by war. I mean, they can't see outside of war. It's like war, war, war. Badr and Uhud and Khandaq and all these, they love, for some reason, they're in love with war. They can't seem to see anything outside of just war. لَقَدْ أَكَلَتْهُمُ الْحَرْبُ مَاذَا عَلَيْهِمْ لَوْ خَلُّوا بَيْنِي وَبَيْنَ سَائِرِ النَّاسِ. What would have it harmed them if they allowed me to speak to people? Just allow me to speak to people. Just explain my message. Instead of telling them, if you accept Islam, you're cut off. We break your sanam. If you kill Muslims, we elevate your status. Instead of doing that, just let me speak to people. فَإِنْ أَصَابُونِي كَانَ الَّذِي أَرَادُوا. If I speak to people and people are like, oh, what you're saying is horrible, and they kill me, then that's exactly what you wanted. Like, you get the people to get rid of me for you instead of you doing it. وَإِنْ أَظْهَرَنِي اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِمْ دَخَلُوا فِي الْإِسْلَامِ وَهُمْ وَافِرُونَ. And if people accept Islam, then they can enter Islam, and they're respected because they're my family. Like everyone else is not related to me. They're related to me. They're my family. They enter Islam, and they're still the family of the Prophet. وَإِن لَمْ يَفْعَلُوا, and if they don't want to accept Islam and the rest, قَاتَلُوا وَبِهِمْ قُوَّةً, they can fight, and at least they have some strength. Because war after war after war, you get drained. Why don't they take a year off? Don't you want to take a year off from war? You've been fighting every single year since he left alayhi salatu wasalam, Mecca. Every year there was a war. Now we talk about the major ones, Badr, Uhud, Al-Khandaq, but there are other smaller ones that happened. Every year there was a new war. So it's like, why don't they just let me speak? If people don't like it, they kill me. They get rid of me. If people like it and accept it, they can accept Islam and they're my family and they can feel respected. And if they don't want to accept Islam, at least they give themselves a year to regroup and prepare themselves for the next war. Why are they so adamant to just keep on fighting? He's saying this because he's like, I can just enter now with who I have and completely do exactly what you're saying. They want to die, I can kill all of them. It's not a problem. I outnumber them, I have more, I have everything. Like I had the advantage. But they, yeah, it's hard sometimes to reason with people who don't want to reason. فماذا تظن قريش? What does Quraysh think? والله إني لا أزال أجاهدهم على الذي بعثني الله له حتى يظهره الله أو تنفرد هذه السالفة. What does Quraysh think? I will continue to strive to achieve my mission and spread my message until either I succeed or I die. There's nothing they can do that will make me stop. I will continue to do this till my last breath. So they're wasting their time. They should just listen. So he would go back. I'll end with this story, inshallah, and let you guys go. Budayl ibn Warqa would go back to Quraysh after hearing these words. And he would say, did I put what he says or did I leave it out? I don't think I did. No, I don't. That's okay. He would end up saying, Wallahi, inna hadha laysa biba'ith harb. This person is not here to cause war. This person has come here for peace. He's looking for peace. He uses those words. إنما أتى للسلم. He's looking for peace. يريد العمرة. He wants to perform umrah. فخلوا بينه وبين الحرم. Let him enter the haram. Let him perform umrah like everyone else. So the leaders of Quraysh, these younger guys, get all upset. And he starts telling, because he's telling them, والله رأيت منه كذا وكذا. Like, honestly, the people with him, they're very committed. He has a lot of followers. Like, this is not smart for you guys to stand up to him like this. So Ikrimah would say, تخبرنا عنه اذهب فأخبره عنا. Don't tell us about him, you go tell him about us, right? And so Safwan يقول اسكت, be quiet, stop this. And they end up asking Budayl, they kick Budayl out. They say, if you're coming to tell us this, then get out. So Budayl takes the rest of Khuza'ah, which is weird because Quraysh had actually recruited Khuza'ah to defend the Haram. Quraysh was getting scared, so they started to bring in the tribes into Mecca. So Mecca was actually condensed at that point, because they brought in all the tribes that were willing to come to defend Mecca with Quraysh. Khuza'ah was like, yeah, we're allies with the Muhammad, but if he's here for war, we'll defend the Haram. So Budayl goes out and speaks to Muhammad, the Prophet ﷺ. He said, like, this guy's not here for war. They're wearing a haram. They're not here for war. They're here for to do umrah. Let them do umrah. No, we're not letting them in. So Budayl's like, nah, this is not acceptable. And Budayl would take Khuza'ah and leave, which was a big group, like 2,000 people, which is a pretty big piece of the army. And the Prophet ﷺ would ask is a very known question. He would ask, Ashiru alayya ayyuhan nas. Oh people, what do we do? What is the next step? What should we do? And then of course they would offer him the advice alayhi salatu wasalam. And they would say, Ya Rasulullah, taqaddam, meaning go forward, move forward. They were right at so maybe if the Prophet had the farthest piece of his camp was where I am. The beginning of Al-Haram is right at that wall. That's where he put it. So he asked, what do we do? Yeah. So Abu Bakr would stand up and say, Ya Rasulullah, la ta'bah lahum, don't listen to them and their calls for war. أتيت للعمرة فتقدم للعمرة. We're here for umrah, we're here for something peaceful, we continue to do that. قال فانشرح صدر رسول الله عليه الصلاة والسلام. He was very happy with that. Because he didn't want, he wasn't looking for someone to come up and say and talk about war. And the rest of the Sahaba all stayed quiet and didn't object. So he did alayhi salatu wasalam. He said, good, that's what we're going to do. So he ends up moving on his camel. His camel is called Al-Qaswa. She's called Al-Qaswa. That's her name. So he's on his camel and he starts marching from where I am. Let's say that the haram begins just at the wall over there. So he's moving with the Qaswa just before the wall, just before the haram begins, the camel sits. So the Sahaba or some people around, قالوا خلأت القصواء. They say the Qaswa disobeyed. Because the Prophet ﷺ was tapping it to move and wasn't moving. فقالوا خلأت القصواء. She's disobeying the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام. So the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام heard it. فقال لا والله ما خلأت القصواء وما كان ذلك لها بخلق. I love that wording. He said no, she didn't disobey and she would never do that. That's not her character. That's not her ethics. He's talking about a camel. قال ما كان ذلك لها بخلق. That's not the ethic of this camel. She would never disobey that way. وإنما حبسها حابس الفيل. But what held her back is what held back the elephant. Let's go back to when his grandfather, remember? When Abraha came to destroy the Kaaba and the elephant stopped. He wouldn't move. And they spent an hour trying to get the elephant to move because it wouldn't march towards the Kaaba. And as they were doing that, the Tayr Ababil came and wiped them all out. Why the elephant wouldn't move is because the elephant would not go and destroy the Haram. And the Qaswa, as if the same concept that if I move forward, there'll be bloodshed. So she stayed. So the Prophet ﷺ got the idea. If we keep on moving, there's going to be bloodshed. It's going to turn into a war. And he doesn't want that. So when the camel actually stopped moving, that's where the army, the camp moved up front. There was an empty well the Prophet ﷺ was able to access. There was nothing in it. And this is the hadith that you'll find in the Sahihain. One of the dala'il al-nubuwwah, one of the evidence of his prophecies ﷺ was an empty well, been empty for years. The Prophet ﷺ would stand, he would recite some Quran. And then he would basically send one of his, he pulled the bow and send one of the arrows down into the well and put his hand into it and the water would come gushing out. And the Sahaba would say that we saw the water running through the fingers of the Prophet ﷺ and the whole army drank water. And these stories in his life, if you remember the increase of the food of Jabir and the water that came out of the well, these aren't miracles because the Prophet ﷺ never said, call Quraysh, let them come and see. Let them come and see the water that's running out of this well that had nothing in it before. A miracle is only a miracle if the Prophet goes and calls his enemies and shows them and proves it. These weren't that. And the Prophet, the only miracle he has is the book that's on that shelf over there. There's nothing else. These were signs of his prophecy. These were things that helped the Sahaba along. These are things that remind the Sahaba that he's not just a political leader or a war commander or a social reformer. He's also the Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He's also the prophet and messenger of God. And there's something there that you need to be reminded of. You can't really compartmentalize him. You'll try and put him in a box. Oh, he was really good at this. There's no boxing the Prophet alayhi salatu wasallam. He was all those things. And he was something beyond all of that. He was a Rasul. He was a prophet. He was a messenger of God. And they would use that well, the water from that well. And at that moment, the political maneuvering would begin. This is where it all starts, and I'll leave it at that. And next week, inshallah, I'll run the halaqah, inshallah, next week, bidhnillahi ta'ala, and you'll enjoy the political maneuvering that Quraysh will try with the Prophet ﷺ to end this whole predicament, because now Arabia is all talking about it. Did you hear Muhammad is literally right outside the Haram with like 1,400 people. They're all in Ihram, and Quraysh is not like that. Did you hear? So now it was like more of a blockbuster movie. All the tribes that weren't there were sending people to. So what's going on? By the end of this story, there were more people watching than there were people involved. There were more people who were just watching what was happening than the actual people who came for Umrah and the people on the inside who were denying them. More people just camping outside, wanting to know what's happening. Because this is very weird. Never before was someone in Ihram denied access before. So this was a big deal. And I'll tell you this story inshallah next week. Subhanakallah bihamdik, la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Wa sallallahu wa sallam wa baraka ala nabiyyina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Jazakallahu khairan, barakallahu fikum. Have a nice night.